so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about the transition from fellowship to faculty. My name is Priscilla. I'll be your moderator. I'm over at University of New Mexico, and I've been an attending for about 4 months. And so I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. So we're going to start with Dr. Corinne Clement.
Sure. So my name's Corinne Clement. I am currently an associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh. I do basic science in mitochondrial biology and lung disease and chronic lung disease. I did my MD PhD here at the University of Pittsburgh, but I left, went to Brigham and Women's for residency and Johns Hopkins for pulmonary and critical care fellowship. And then at the end of fellowship, went on the job market and ended up moving with my K to the University of Pittsburgh to start my lab and my career, and recently transitioned over to an R01. So that's kind of the stage where I'm at.
And then we'll go to Dr. Alicia Rizzo.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see everyone. My name is Alicia Rizzo. I'm also at UPMC. I guess we just kind of took over this webinar, but we'll try to be as, providing general guidelines as possible. That'll be applicable everywhere. I'm a brand new assistant professor, so and I do work on the glycocalyx and ARDS and sepsis. So my path, I was an undergrad at Hopkins, actually with Priscilla, our other moderator, and then went to University of Illinois for MD, PhD. Then I moved a little bit further out west to Colorado for residency and fellowship. Then in the middle of my fellowship, my mentor moved to MGH, so I moved with the lab there. I finished my last year of research fellowship there and then stayed on for a year as faculty, and then moved here to Pittsburgh. I'm in a two physician scientist household, so my husband and I were trying to find an institution that would support both of our careers, and we were fortunate to find it here. So yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you both. So just to get us started, I have some questions. And of course, if you have questions in the audience, please just put them in the chat. But to get us started, how did you decide which institution to move to after fellowship? What was that decision like? What were the factors that you considered?
Sure. So I can start. So I knew I wanted to have a physician scientist career, so I needed to be at an academic medical center that would support that. And so part of it was, again, my husband is a physician scientist, but in biotech. And so we needed a place. Location was a big issue. We needed to be in a city that had a good airport or reasonable airport that he could get to work and I could have my career. So with that narrowed us down to start. And then as I sort of identified universities and programs, I needed to find places that actually had openings for junior faculty at the K level, and two, those that were supportive. So things I was looking for is there a support network of other physician scientists that are doing work that's not exactly what the work I'm doing, but similar, that would be supportive. And then that had the kind of the clinical mix that I wanted. Even though I do 25% clinical time, I needed to make sure that that they needed the skill set or the clinical angle that I was doing. I do critical care, ICU time, but also outpatient COPD. And so those were some of the considerations. And then because I moved at the K level, I needed to have a mentor to go to. Because I was leaving the mentor, I applied for my K at Hopkins, and at the time I was looking for jobs, I had a score on a K, but I didn't actually have it in hand. I didn't know if I was gonna actually get it on that round. So I needed a place that was supportive of me through that, whether I had the K or not. And then also a mentor and mentor team that it's not going to be an exact match, but somebody who would be supportive and be able to help me grow and build my lab. It turned out that a lot of it I ended up doing a lot kind of on my own. Even though I did have some mentorship for larger networking things, there is a little bit more heavy lifting you have to do if you decide to move institutions. But those were some of the factors that I was thinking about.
Really helpful. Dr. Rizzo, what would you say when you were looking at new institutions?
Yeah, so my process was pretty similar to Corinne's, and she took a lot of the great answers. So I'm just going to echo all of what she said. I think a lot of people at our stage have families and spouses who are also in various careers that need to be in specific spots. So I would say like a good first pass at looking for institutions is like for you and your partner to both come up independently with what would be the places that I would like to be at, and then you can kind of like see how much of this merges and then kind of can eliminate places that either wouldn't work completely for one of you, and then move the places to the top that would be a good fit for both of you, and then really try to pursue those to the highest degree. I would also echo, so I came with a Parker B. Francis Award and then a K that was in revision but not yet funded. And so similarly trying to stay somewhere where there'd be mentors who are not doing exactly what I do, but would be willing to be a local mentor while still keeping my co-mentor from my prior institution. And then I guess I would just say like the vibes of all the early career faculty were really important to me. Like just having other people that are excited about doing science and excited about developing projects and working together. And you want to work somewhere where your work is complementary to all your peers, but not in direct, you don't want to be doing the same thing as someone who's already at that institution, because then, you don't want to be in competition with somebody at your same career stage. You want something where like people see your work as something that could bring, enhance their work and vice versa. And let's see, I'm kind of rambling. I think those are the main things. And then if there's people that are like a few years ahead of you, whose like careers you see yourself like, wanting to emulate. Like for me, I have Dr. Clement and a whole group of like junior investigators here that I'm like, wow, if I can be that successful, I'll be super happy. And so just having like good role models that are in the like 5 to 10 years ahead of you, is something that's really helpful, because sometimes the, super senior people don't necessarily remember all the struggles of our early career life.
And so it sounds like you both had Ks that were in process, and maybe even Dr. Rizzo, you said you had an award and grant. So my question for you both is, how did you transition those awards from your current institution to the new institution? And it sounds like you both needed to find some new mentors. So how did you find those mentors? We'll start with Dr. Clement.
Yeah, so I guess the one benefit that I had was that I did medical school here at Pitt. So I knew some of the faculty and I knew who I wanted to work with. One of the big decisions about finding a new mentor is understanding for you personally what kind of mentorship you need. Do you need somebody to be more like a sponsor to kind of help promote you or talk over ideas? Or do you need somebody for more of kind of the day-to-day learning skills, learning skill sets, things like that? So those are very different mentor types. But I kind of knew who I was going to tap to be my mentor. He ended up being very high up in leadership at UPMC, and so was very busy. And so that's why I say I was pretty independent when I came here, because I didn't have he wasn't around to mentor all that much, but we had lab meetings together, and he was very, very helpful in the larger, bigger questions that I had about, gosh, what would an eventual R01 concept be? Does this seem reasonable? But a lot of how do you get stuff done on the ground in setting up a lab, I kind of had to kind of feel that out and figure that out on my own. I think, and that was the finding a mentor question. Yeah. So I think finding that mentor was important. And then as I got here, I identified and tapped in other people to be kind of additional mentors that could help me navigate some of the little things like setting up animal protocols or human protocols, those sorts of things, and figuring out all of those things. As far as like funding things, those all kind of the transition of funding, that was fairly easy. Actually, right after I signed my contract, I found out that all my grants were funded, which was great. And Pitt really enjoyed getting that email. But I ended up then having to just work with the NIH to just transfer and the other funding agencies to transfer everything over, which was fairly straightforward. There was a risk that they could maybe revoke it, but I've not heard of them ever doing that. So it was fine. You just have to send in new letters to show that the new place that you're at is equally supportive of you as what you were at the original institution.
Thank you. And Dr. Rizzo?
Yeah, perfect advice from Dr. Clement. I would say, I guess it's a lot with regards to like moving your funding. I would say it's a lot easier to move funding than it is to get funding. And if you're at somewhere now, just submit everything. Submit like the same proposal to multiple foundations, submit everywhere, because money is going to help you when you're negotiating for your job. And so anything you have in hand is going to help. Having stuff in process is good, but it's not as good as having it in hand. I also haven't heard of anyone, getting in the situation where their grant is funded, but then when they tell the sponsor that they're moving to a different institution and still want to continue in science, that they're gonna like take it away. I think like at the K level and all of these early career awards, like the product and the science is you. The product is you and your career. And so if you can make a case in your thing that in your transfer application that like I'm getting promoted, I'm still going to have mentors, I'm establishing my independence, like I think that the moving it isn't necessarily the hard part. It's a lot of paperwork, and so I spent a lot of time over the last few months like rewriting these mentor plans and training plans and all this kind of stuff. But I think that the amount of time that people spent on the other end reading it is probably small, is what I'll say. So yeah, I think just submit as much as you can before you move, to try to give yourself more leverage when you're negotiating your contract. But even if you haven't and you move somewhere and then need to submit, just submitting as much as you can. Yeah.
Thank you. And kind of as a follow-up question, Dr. Rizzo, what advice did you get when you were negotiating in terms of your first academic job? And what did you try negotiating? What did you try to negotiate for, and how did it play out? How did that go?
Sure. Yeah. So I think in general, like everyone's like, oh, I want a lot of money for my startup. But if you put yourself in the eyes of the division chief who's interviewing and applying for you, they're interviewing a person and you're presenting your scientific vision and your career vision, and they want to know what is it going to take to do that successfully. And they want to give you that amount, but they don't want to give you more than that amount because they have a million other people at their institution who also want money and need enough money to be successful. And so they have a lot of mouths to feed. And so you've got to understand that. So I broke it down to like, what science did I propose? Like literally sitting there with the grant, like I proposed to do this. This is how much it costs. So I prepared a spreadsheet and I said, like, I would need a technician at this cost. I would need a mouse colony at this cost. I would need, just like going through everything that you proposed that you were going to do and say, to do these things, I need this. And like, you can even include equipment in there. And then it's possible that your division chief will come back and say, hey, like, we're not able to give you a full technician. We're able to give you support for half a technician, or we're not able to give you equipment money to buy all of these things, but there's some that are in the lab down the hall and you can share. And so I think it's all about just getting the things that you need to do your science. And, so if you can just like attach, they don't want like a thing saying like, I demand $1 million. They want to know like specifically, what do you want to do and what do you need to do it? And that'll just show that like you've thought through everything fully and you're trying to they were overheading something. So yeah, I think just trying to show what your vision is and what you would need to achieve it would be kind of my advice.
That sounds great. So it sounds like you were really organized and you focused on what you needed to get the job done. This question is for Dr. Clement. If you don't mind, a lot of times as new faculty, we're told that we need to learn how to say no and how to turn down opportunities so we're not overwhelmed. But those opportunities can sometimes give us, some extra things for our CV. And so I guess my question for you is, how did you navigate this early in your career, figuring out what to say yes to, what to say no to? And can you give us a few examples of things you may have turned down?
Sure. So this is something you're going to have to do throughout your career. So I think it's good to just get started doing it early. When I was first starting out, my mentor had said, look, if there's something that somebody comes to you and you're unsure whether you want to take that or not, or even if you want to say no, but you don't want to say no right then, just tell them, hey, is it possible that I can get back to you in a set amount of time, whether that's 24 hours or whatever? I'd like to talk this over with my mentor. And what that allows you to do, and if the mentor's okay with it, is that you can actually use them as your out. So like, hey, I talked over, my career goals and everything with my mentor, and I think we decided that really now is not the right time for this, but thank you for keeping me in mind, and please keep me in mind for future opportunities. So that's a way to kind of say no, but you kind of use your mentor to piggyback. And so it's not just you saying, no, thank you. You can actually use your mentor to do that. Now, after a while, when you don't need to do that anymore, and you can make those decisions on your own. What happens is you do have to decide on things. For example, if I want to add something, I have to take something away. So, for example, our division chief here had approached me about being one of our associate program directors for research for the fellowship, which is a big job. And I had said, well, thank you for that opportunity. I'm happy to take it and to do that, have that role, but I'm going to have to give up something else. And so one of my other roles was running, for example, like a grant writing course and the fellowship journal club. And so those were things that I was like, those are things, if you don't mind, we can take off my plate so that I can do this other role. And that way that freed up my time, because you don't have infinite amount of time. So things are going to have to come in and out, and you pick up things that you're passionate about or that you feel like they're going to actually, be promoting you on your CV, but try to avoid non-promotable tasks. So if there's someone else that can plan the social happy hour, even though you've been doing it for a long time, maybe you tag in someone else to do that, because it's really a non-promotable task. There are non-promotable tasks and roles that are actually, if you are really passionate about it, you do it because you enjoy it and you love it, and it fulfills your heart, and those are good things to do. So there are certain things like that. I think in the last year, I've had a couple opportunities where I've been asked to do international travel for organizations and be a representative. And I've had to decide, it was really hard, but I had to decide to say no to a few of those, primarily for family reasons. And having young kids, it's really hard to be away for over a week. And so I just said, thank you for that opportunity. Please keep me in mind for future travel opportunities to represent said organization. And those are hard. Those are things where you're trying to really weigh, like, gosh, this really could help my career, but is it the right time? And you don't know. But I did a lot of talking it over with people, with somebody who was acting as kind of a coach for me. I talked it over with them to try to think through the decision on my own, rather than have somebody just tell me what I should do. So.
That's really helpful, especially using the mentor as a way to say no without you personally saying no.
And it's somebody to talk to about it too. You shouldn't, sometimes it's hard to make these decisions on your own as you're trying to weigh, what would be the right career decision. And usually there's no right or wrong answer. New opportunities will come up all the time, but the mentor one is really helpful to use that.
And Dr. Clement, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges or obstacles or learning points when you moved to your new institution?
Yeah, I mean, a new institution is it's a new place, so you have to learn new ways of doing things. Things are different. Every place has its little tendencies, and so you have to learn those. And I did a lot of just observing when I was attending for the first time in the ICU. I did a lot of just kind of feeling out how did things work there, because it was different. It was different than any of the other ICUs I'd ever been in. And so you try to then understand, like, say, present yourself like, this is me, these are my thoughts, but I'm also open to learning new things and new cultural ways of taking care of things, and whether that be on the research side or on the clinical side. Other really challenging things, I think, were like hiring someone, running a lab, whether it's doing clinical research or basic science research. It's a small business. And I don't know about you guys, but nobody in medical school taught me how to run a business. And I got my PhD, but I did not go to business school. So, running a lab, having a budget, having to hire people, the people issues are the most difficult things. And when you're first starting out, so you hire a technician to help you, you're still doing a lot of the work yourself. So you're doing the data analysis, you're writing the paper, you're writing the grants, and that is exhausting. So you have to try to find ways to build teams and collaborations where some of that is offloaded from you, so that you need hands. And so, for example, if your startup will pay for, and you negotiate for a coordinator or a lab tech, the first thing you need to do is hire that person and do it as quickly as possible, so that you can, and then if you get a grant that gives a little bit of extra money to try to hire someone else, or to pay for an undergrad or pay for someone else, like, get those people involved, right? Because you need hands to do the work that we're doing. You need people, and the people and the people power is the biggest part that I felt I really struggled with, because I'd never done it before. Nobody taught me about it. And that's where I kind of really leaned on my mentor to learn, gosh, this person doesn't seem like they're working out. Do I try to like let them go, or and how do I do that? These are hard discussions. And so, that was the biggest challenge that I had at a new institution when I first got there. But people had advised me, if you have startup, or even if it's a little bit, like, try to use it. We all try to save it, so that I don't want to waste it. I don't want to spend it down. But in order to get in a business, in order to get product out, you have to invest something. And so that's what that money is there for. And so if you're lucky enough to have a job where you've been able to negotiate for that, use it and help it to let that help you establish kind of a team. And it'll be small to start, but it'll grow over time as you mentor people and bring people in.
So just kind of as a follow-up question, how did you learn those business skills? Was there a book, a class? What's the secret?
To be honest, I tapped my husband on a few of these, because he's been in the biotech world, and he's had to hire and fire people and things like that. And their world is a lot different than ours. In academia, it's really hard to hire and fire people. In business, it's very easy. And so he was just giving me, like, I'd come home and I would talk about these situations, and he's like, well, what about this? What about trying this? And so it was more just having those discussions, and I kind of learned it on my own. I talk with my HR a lot to learn from them, because they know all the rules and they know what are the easiest ways. I talked to my division director to say, hey, these are the challenges I'm having. Like, I'm really struggling in hiring someone because HR is taking forever, or whatever the issue is. And then they can work on their end to try to resolve some of those things. But a lot of it was getting perspectives of those who have seen the non-academic world, I think was helpful for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice, stuff that we don't ever think about early in our careers for sure. Dr. Rizzo, how did your institution and you coworkers help with the transition?
I'm muted. Sorry. So, here I got assigned, not really assigned, but a suggested sort of early to mid-career mentor who was Dr. Clement, and we just had coffee and she dropped all the knowledge and told me like all of the sort of pitfalls early on. And so it's helpful if you can have someone who's a few years ahead of you who did it well to sorry, one second. They overhead a lot of things here. That's one of our quirks here at UPMC. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but okay, sorry, that's over. So yeah, it's helpful if you can find somebody that's a few years ahead of you, that's done it well, who's able to tell you what their pitfalls were, because it's going to be a little bit different each place. And so if you have someone local that's able to help you with that, that's really good. Otherwise, I mean, just meeting people, getting involved, like participating in all the conferences and, letting people know what you do, seeing if you can get on the schedule to present at the research in progress relatively early in the year. So people like learn about what you're doing and can see, ways that your work may overlap, is really helpful. Yeah, I think just like trying to meet as many people as you can in the beginning and figure out like where you fit in the division and what expertise you can bring to other people's work, in addition to just trying to like promote your own stuff, which is obviously important, but
I think it's also really hard when you're first joining a division is that you get we all get really excited about all the work, and it's really hard to stay focused. And so as you meet people, you'll start to establish collaborations, and collaborations, they usually don't have an immediate output. So for example, like you'll establish a collaboration, and it doesn't mean next month you're going to have a paper out of that. It's going to be over a year. Oh, like these are like long-term things you're setting up. And so you start to establish those, but then once you move to your new place, really set a checklist for yourself of like what are the things that you need to do now versus what things can you kind of put off for a little bit. And so that you'll work some things in parallel, like finishing up a paper or, getting that prelim data so that you can resubmit your K or whatever you have to do, at the new place. I think just being very diligent about knowing what your short-term and what your long-term goals are, because the time passes pretty quickly. I feel like, I've been at Pitt for 6 years, and it feels like literally just the other day I was moving in and starting my K. So, it goes by really fast, but try to have set goals for yourself and then review those with your mentors as you go along. And then that way they can help you to achieve those goals.
And just kind of as a follow-up to that, my question for you is, what are reasonable targets for an early stage investigator? How many papers should we be getting out a year? What should we be targeting?
Oh boy, that's a bit of a tough one, primarily because it depends on whether or not you are doing a basic science project versus a big clinical trial versus other, types of papers that fall within the middle spectrum. For example, like my postdoc paper from fellowship, I came into fellowship and I was like, my project and paper is not going to be a 6-year paper. Definitely no. Nope, not going to happen. Not to me. Sure enough, by the time it was actually published, it was 6 years. So my publication didn't even come until 2 years into my K. So for example, some of the very basic mechanistic papers that go from concept all the way through a mechanism are going to take 4 years. And so that we understand that, but I think you want to try to balance small papers with medium sized to large papers. I mean, I think large papers are really hard. They take a lot of time. So if you can do small papers at this point, really it's a numbers game. So I don't know. I mean, people will say, 2 papers, people will say more. It's different for each I think it's a little different for each person. Whether whether you can still get your K with a preprint, right? Because a paper that's in process, you're not, it's in revisions. That's possible, but usually, I don't know, it's hard. I don't know if Alicia, if you have any other thoughts on numbers of papers, but
Yeah, I mean, for the
more is
same
better.
you're mentioning, it's really hard. I mean, the scope of the project, what exactly you're doing, what type of research. I think people will count them, but that's not really a fair way to, assess this. Um, I think Corinne and I both had MD PhDs, so it was like you probably need a publication where you're first author and it's a research publication, not a review, to get your first grant, because are going to want to see like some productivity. But like if you have stuff from a PhD or a prior research experience, and then, other stuff is in process or close, then that could be enough to push you over the edge. But you probably do need something that's like published in a research publication, where you're the first author, in order to get your early career award. But then like numbers, it's just kind of tough. Like one first author Nature paper is probably worth more than, a couple smaller papers. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
That makes sense. And then just kind of thinking about different institutions and their cultures, did you find that you had to make any changes in the way that you do things, either clinically or as an educator or a researcher, to adapt to your new environment?
I don't think so. I mean, there are like little clinical things, like all the attendings at UPMC intubate. We don't call anesthesia. So that was something very different from where I trained. And so that was something I was like, oh boy, that puts a little more pressure on me on day one. But from a research perspective, I think each institution has its own flavor of how the faculty interact. I think you really want to be at a place where people collaborate and talk to each other and are excited about each other's work. If it's really siloed and labs don't tend to cross over and talk, I think that becomes really hard. It becomes a very lonely environment because you feel alone. So I don't think there wasn't anything really new or different that I had to change from there, other than early career faculty is a really unique time because you're trying to learn how to establish a machine and a business and something that's going to run on its own. And for a lot of years, I say like I'm 6 years in, this is year 6, and I now finally feel like I'm at a point where if I'm on the unit for a week, that research still goes on. The machine is still running when I'm not there. Previously, I was a cog in the machine, and so the machine would stop when I would be in the unit. And so there were little things that I negotiated for example, like I wanted my clinical time to be at locations near my lab, so that during the week, if something was going on crazy and I needed to stop by, I can just stop by in and say, hey guys, how's stuff going? How's progress? I can check in with the lab and see how things are going. Now, what that meant was that I also had to I know I'm kind of going on to negotiating for a job, but when you're thinking about that, you have to think about, what does your division chief need, and division need, and what do you need? And so you ask for stuff, but you also have to offer or meet them halfway. So my meet halfway was that I would cover a service that people didn't really like to cover very much. It was like a vent weaning, like LTAC hospital. I was like, I will cover a week there if that means that I can have all my clinical time near the location of my lab at the main hospital, not 45 minutes away at somewhere where I would not be back for 7 days. And so that to me was really important, and actually was a really great way, because that's what the division needed. They needed somebody to help cover that service. And so they were meeting me and I was meeting them, and it was actually a really nice negotiating tool to use. So think about those kind of things as you're going to new places and getting to know the environments there that may be different. You have to kind of adjust and shift. You're not going to get everything you ask for. And it's not going to be the exact way your last institution was. I think the biggest thing you can do to harm yourself is come to an institution and say, hey, oh, well, at so and so, that's where this is how we do it. So that's how we're going to do it. That doesn't usually go over very well. So sometimes you just have to kind of bring new ideas, but also blend in with the culture there as you're getting to know it.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's say, just kind of going back to this negotiation, let's say that somebody negotiates a job, they get started. It can be very difficult to know before getting there if it's going to be a good fit or not. How long would you say somebody should stay in that job before looking for a new job?
I think it kind of depends on how bad it is. You would hope that like any big red flags, you'd be able to identify those before getting there. So ask a lot of questions, whether it's about, oftentimes I feel like part of it ends up being clinical time, like that people don't realize either how much clinical time or what the services are that they're covering. And then they get into it and they're like, oh, this was not what I expected. I don't like this. Um, I think you need to, the first 6 months are going to be, or in 6 months to a year are going to be really rough. I mean, it's a transition. It's a new transition everywhere. And so you have to kind of go with the flow. So I wouldn't make any haste decisions right away. I mean, sometimes you need 3 years to settle in. I don't recommend moving. If you're like, for example, if you have a K and you're at a place, you really need to establish yourself and show that during those 5 years, in order to get an R and transition smoothly to an R, that you really have to show stability. And if you're moving too frequently, you're gonna lose that stability and you're gonna delay your transition to independence. That's kind of a given. I think the times that people typically will move is right before a K or right after getting an R01. So usually the end of a K is a poor time to leave because you don't yet have an R, and so you don't have that as your negotiating tactic. And you also are trying to establish yourself, and then you're going to pick up and move and have to reestablish. So that's a tough time to move. You can if you have to. Things come up. Sometimes people have to, but that's also a tough time.
So it sounds like probably the best thing to do is give it maybe a couple years, see if how it goes, and then really depends. It sounds like it really depends on where you are in your career in terms of taking the risk of moving, whether you're at the end of the K or beginning of a K or already have an R.
Yeah, and being open, like if you need to pivot, right? If something's not working, you can pivot. Pivoting is fine. Or you realize, like, I think I realized partway through my K that I could not do aim one of what I had proposed. I just couldn't do it. I tried, I couldn't do it. And I thought, I'm like, they're never going to fund me again. This is terrible. I can't even do my aims. And so, but it's okay. Like the projects pivot, follow your science, follow your clinical interests, follow what it is, but be kind of honest with yourself about if you're not happy, they're going to be growing pains. But once you work through those, you should be able to find some clarity.
It's really helpful. Is there anything that you would have done differently looking back at when you first started as an early stage investigator? Anything that you would have changed?
I probably would have been more open to using my startup more, like even more early on than what I did, for hiring people and things like that. I mean, overall, I was pretty happy with how the transition went. I was kind of more on my own doing it, but that was fine. I kind of ended up building things on my own. Um, I can't think of anything major that I would have done differently, I don't think.
Okay, great. And I know it's early, Dr. Rizzo, but anything that you would do differently these days? Or maybe in the job search, anything you would have asked for or anything different for the process?
These are probably the mistakes that I'm making right as we speak and don't notice, because I'm pretty early. I mean, I'm pretty happy overall. I mean, I think if I had waited and was negotiating for a job now with my, fundable K score, that would have made I may have gotten more startup funding than I did without it, because money helps you get money. But, due to family reasons, we wanted to move sooner rather than later. So it's just a balance. In terms of things I would have done differently, uh, I don't think so. I mean, it just in terms of your last question about like moving and like when should you consider moving, I think one thing you definitely have to consider is that moving again, really hurts your productivity. So like when I moved mid-fellowship, when my mentor moved, to stay with the lab, and then it takes like a year. Basically, I was quoted, it takes about a year for a lab to get set up to get to the point where you're like generating data and you have stuff to look at. Like before that, I'm like trying to like figure out where's the freezer that I can use, where's the mouse room that I can use, writing a mouse protocol, trying to get my IRB approved. It's like all this stuff that doesn't get you data, that doesn't get you papers, that like hopefully is going to get you grants, but it's like it takes a while to get to the point where you can generate data that you can use. So if you're talking about moving twice, like I did, then it's basically 2 years now that is relatively unproductive. Hopefully I'll be able to, sort of recover from that. And I think I'm in an okay spot now, since my K got funded, but it does like, it slows you down. Moving slows you down. So it's like you have to consider, and getting started in a new place takes time. So like I wouldn't say like not to get down on wherever you are at too early. Like if you just start a job and everything's not perfect, it's not gonna be perfect at first. You have to figure out, like there's a lot of having to figure out how to make things work at a new place. And, it may be collaborating with different people to get different things, or just figuring out creative ways to make things work in a different place, because it's not going to be the same as your prior place. And yeah, there may be ways to make things work for you that you haven't considered yet. So asking mentors, division chiefs, like, hey, this is the problem I'm having. I would say speak up early about like what problems you're having, because they want to help you. If they hired you and are investing money in you, then they want you to succeed. And so if you're having a problem and you don't tell anyone about your problem, you're going to continue having a problem. So letting people know, like, I'm having trouble with aim 1 because I don't have this, and then they could try to help you get that. But yeah, that was kind of rambly. Sorry.
No, that's really good advice. I think one of the things that I've noticed is how exhausting it could be to make these transitions. And so you're learning a new environment, you're doing your research, you're trying to, adapt to a new city, a new state, a new whatever you're adapting to. I was kind of curious, how do you guys avoid burnout? Do you have any strategies for avoiding burnout?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to find what grounds you. So if you like exercise or you like cooking or whatever it is, like you need to make sure that you schedule that in, and that it is, you actually make time for it, because it does, if you lose those things, those are the first things that we sort of put aside, but if you lose those things, that will make it even more difficult. For me, when I moved, and I still do, I have young kids. And so, I learned early on, I would go home and I would be on my computer even while they're like running around, and I would try to like double task. And at some point I was like, I'm missing out. I'm missing out on really, really important things. And so my rules is that I will work once they go to bed. I'll go back and do some extra work if I have to. But not once I get home and it's kids' time, I'm sorry, I won't have a meeting after 5 p.m. unless it's really, really important and it's rare, because that's my kids' time. And so I put those those that mindset in place pretty early on. And that's really helped me. And I put my phone away, I put my computer away, and it's them. Now, are there times when you have a deadline and I need to spend some time doing some work on an evening? Absolutely, I will do it. But that's papers don't give you hugs. Grants don't give you hugs. Your family does. And so for me, that was really important. So I probably sacrifice sleep to get work done at night. But I'm trying to, it's work-life integration and trying to figure that out. But that, to me, those things like making sure that I get some exercise in and making sure that my kids are happy and that I'm enjoying and being able to partake in their activities, that was really important to me. And I will say, like a career in academics as a physician scientist is amazing because you have the flexibility when you're not on service. Now, when I'm on service, that's a different ballgame. But ideally, that shouldn't be a lot of time. That should be fairly limited. So just some thoughts there. But those are things that were important and that I integrated.
Thank you. That's so helpful. In our last 10 minutes, do you have any final pieces of advice for our audience making these transitions?
Do you want to go first, Grant?
No, go
Drop
ahead.
all the important knowledge and then I'll try to pick up some scraps at the end.
So, gosh, let's see. I think when it comes to looking for jobs, I think you have to go into it really knowing what you want. I think when people end up in situations where they're unhappy or whatnot is when they don't realize what they want or what they need. And you have to know what you need to be successful. And then you have to ask for it. I think Alicia talked a little bit about this, about, having a needs list. And yes, it's painstaking and you have to make one for every institution separately, but those are important. They're important to kind of know what you need, what you want, and then you can ask for it. Little kind of tips and tricks that I had somebody look over my contract, just to make sure that I looked over every single word to make sure there weren't mistakes. A lot of the negotiating that you're going to do is going to happen over the phone, or by email before you actually get a document in hand, because if they're going to earmark money for you or they're going to earmark clinical time for you or something, that all takes time to get into place. And so sometimes those will be discussions over the phone. But then I would always put them in writing. If they agreed to something, I would say, just to summarize our conversation from today, here were the bullet points we talked about, so that everything is down. And then I would make sure that it made it into my contract, so that my contract was intact. And then I think once you get to a place, when are the opportunities to be able to readdress some of these things? One, when you get a grant, and two, when you get a promotion. And so those are the big times when you can ask for different things. But if you get to a place and you find out there's something that you really need to be successful, you should ask, because if you identify it and you need help with something, don't be afraid. The worst thing they can do is tell you no. But be armed with data to show why you need that thing, whatever it is, whether it's time or space or money or, help with something. Know how it's beneficial to you, and how it's either beneficial or a give from your division or your department or whoever you're asking from, so you understand both sides.
Thank you. Dr. Rizzo, anything you want to add?
Sure. I guess I would say, when you're thinking of different places and in the stage of coming up with the list of places that you want to pursue in terms of hiring, I would try to rely, and I guess throughout the whole process of negotiation, you can really rely on your mentors a lot for or your current chief at your current institution, because they've had a lot of experience with hiring people, and they're going to know what's a reasonable request and what's a not reasonable request. And hey, so when I was coming up with my list of this is what I would need startup wise, I ran it by my former division chief and was like, hey, does this seem reasonable? Is this like what people ask for when they're, because I think when you're junior, you're feeling, we all have a little bit of imposter syndrome, like, what, someone wants to give me money? Like, I'm like, I'm demanding all these things, but it's like, yes, I am. And so I think you have to sort of get opinions on, try to figure out like how to make your list of things that you need come across in a way that it looks good to a division chief. They can also help you in terms of connecting you with the right people. I'll say, like, when I was looking at places, I had applied to posted positions, but that like never goes anywhere because the nationwide searches take like so long that by the time anyone got back to me on that, it was like I had already basically signed a contract. So a lot of cold emails to division chiefs or people that you've known at other places could be helpful. So here I had emailed someone who was not the division chief, but was previously at my institution I did fellowship at and had moved here. So that person already knows me and was able to like forward my email to the division chief and say like, hey, I know this person, they're good. Like you should, look into them a little bit more. So the more people that are higher up that are, speaking on your behalf in either a phone call or an email is helpful, and to just stay open-minded about looking into a lot of different places at least at the onset. Oh, and then I guess the other thing I would say in terms of like you making your decision would be talking to, similar to how we all advise like people joining a lab, like, oh, talk to the people in the lab to make sure it's a good environment. Talk to the people that are at your stage at another institution and make sure they seem happy. Because if all the early career faculty are disgruntled and unhappy, then you're probably going to get there and be disgruntled and unhappy because you're going to run into the same exact problems that they're running into. So asking them what the problems that they're having is, and making sure that people at your stage or a little bit above are succeeding, basically.
That's really good advice, especially the cold emailing. I think most of our jobs find
It
are from
feels
just
really
emailing.
uncomfortable to just like cold email and be like, hey, I'm looking for a job and I, have XYZ experience, but it's not like these jobs are posted on LinkedIn and you just like apply, it's not a Tech 3 job like the one I'm trying to recruit for.
Agreed. I'm looking at our chat. I don't see any questions in there. Are there any questions from our audience? Okay, well, I think this was really, really helpful. I learned a lot. I think we all learned a lot, and I want to thank you both so much for volunteering your time, and hopefully this helps us adapt to our new institutions and find jobs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Good luck on the job hunt, everyone.
Bye-bye.